Take a look at this picture. Can you tell what the lady is sitting on? Well, believe it or not, this lady is sitting on top of a giant puzzle. And this isn't any ordinary puzzle either. This is a Ravensburg puzzle that is the largest in the world and is made of more than 40,000 individual puzzle pieces. But while this is the biggest puzzle in the world, puzzles aren't the only things that are made of lots of little pieces. Take a look at this guy. Watch as he builds a wall out of lots of little bricks. People make giant structures out of bricks. Here's a picture of New York City. And that building in the middle, that's the Empire State Building. It was built out of more than 10 million bricks. Here's another. Watch as this man and his friend build a sand castle out of lots of tiny grains of sand. Now, he doesn't individually place each grain of sand, but still, the castle is made out of lots of tiny individual pieces. Pretty cool. Can you think of other things that are made of lots of little pieces? What can you come up with? Now, it has been pretty clear so far what each of the things we've been looking at are made of. Puzzles are made of puzzle pieces. Brick walls are made of lots of bricks. Sandcastles are made of tiny grains of sand. But it's not always so obvious. What if we decide to look at just an individual puzzle piece, or a single brick, or a single grain of sand? When we look at these, it becomes a little less clear. What are each of these things built out of? And it's not just these three objects either. These three things are all just different types of matter. Remember, our definition of matter is that matter is anything that has weight and takes up space, like a brick, a puzzle piece, or a grain of sand. But what is matter made of? Is all matter made of lots of little pieces? Well, you weren't the first person to think about this question. Around the year 500 BC in ancient Greece, more than 2,000 years ago, a scientist named Democritus thought about a similar idea. He wondered, what would happen if I took an apple and kept cutting it into smaller and smaller and smaller pieces? What would I find if I kept cutting? What do you think? How small of a piece do you think I could cut an apple into? What would I find if I did that? Well, Democritus thought that eventually, if you kept cutting, you would reach a point where you had such a small piece of apple that it was impossible to cut it anymore. Democritus thought that these tiny, uncuttable pieces were the building blocks of matter. He imagined them like little balls, with everyday objects being built out of a lot of these, like this, making an apple. Today, we call these pieces particles. The definition of a particle is that it's a tiny object that makes up all matter. According to Democritus, when you look at something like a brick, you can really think of it as made of lots of little particles of brick. But if everything is built of these tiny particles, then why don't we see them? Why does a brick just look like a brick? Can you see the particles of matter around you? Why do you think you can or cannot? Well, to understand this, let's go back to the puzzle that we were initially looking at. When you look at this puzzle, can you see the individual puzzle pieces? Not really. When we look at it, it just looks like a solid picture. When an object is made of so many smaller pieces, it can become hard to see each individual piece. So how many particles does it take to build a piece of matter? Well, let's start with something small, like an individual grain of sand. How many particles do you think there are in a single grain of sand? Well, unfortunately, no matter which answer you picked, they were all way, way too small. Ready for it? Well, each grain of sand is a little different, but generally, a grain of sand is made of this many particles. Now, this number is so big that it's hard to even say. Let's understand just how big this number is. If you had this many pennies, you could cover the entire Earth, not once, but 13 times. If you counted this many seconds, it would take you more than 200 billion years. That's 15 times longer than the lifespan of the entire universe. And think about it. That many particles are all squished together in only one teeny tiny grain of sand. Particles are so small that we need to add on to our definition. Not only are particles tiny objects that make up all matter, but we could say particles are too small to ever see. Now, Democritus didn't know about the size of particles when he first thought about cutting up an apple. It wasn't until much more recently that scientists such as Niels Bohr and Albert Einstein were able to prove that these particles are real and that they actually exist. You will have a chance to learn more about how we know particles are real later. But for now, what you need to remember is that all matter is made of tiny particles, and they are too small to ever see.